Welcome back to another episode of the Cameras and Coffee podcast. I am sitting here with OFD Consulting owner Meghan Ely, and we're going to talk about unlocking the secrets to getting published. Thanks, Meghan, for being on the show. I'm so excited you're
I
here.
appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yes. So before we get started, what are we drinking this morning?
Okay, so what I'm doing this morning, and I did knowing I was going on this podcast, I was a little stressed about the mug, but I'm like, just own it. So I travel a lot speaking, and when I go into these hotels, they have these gorgeous Nespresso machines, and I always thought, well, I can't have that because environment, all this stuff. And then one day I looked it up and found out you can recycle all the capsules. So I was like, this is what I
Oh,
want. And so now it's a hazelnut Nespresso with just a splash of almond milk in it. So that's what I have.
okay.
May I tell you too? Not that you asked, but I'm going to tell you. My mug, I picked it
Yes.
because so this is Virginia and it's the Starbucks line, the original kind of, here's all the cities and stuff. The person who designed these mugs did my original OFD logo. So I thought that was a fun little
I love it.
story for today to get us started.
Aw, I love that. Yeah, that's so fun. I know. I have a friend that collects mugs every place she goes from Starbucks. And
That's
yeah,
fun.
the Michigan one is super fun too.
Oh,
I
I
love
love
it.
that.
I'm like, I don't know why I don't have one.
I know. I was
But when I go visit her, I use hers because I'm like, this is
Well, they
so
don't make it
fun.
easy. You can't buy them online, and I know that, or the old ones at
Yeah.
least, because my friend Sarah, the one who designed, like, helped design them, her mom wanted all of them. So it's like I would go to airports and take photos and be like, "Does your mom have Dallas? Does your mom have Chicago?" And just pick them up for her.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, let's kind of dive in. So, tell us about you, Megan. So, tell us what you do, how you got there, all the
All the
things.
things. So I'm a wedding
Yeah.
publicist and owner of OFD Consulting. So I've spent, well, I feel like my whole life in hospitality, but 20 years in the wedding and event industry. And for the first bunch of years, I worked in venues. So I actually worked with photographers
Mm.
every single weekend. Like it does make a difference. I must say right off the bat, I learned the power of like liking the people you were working with over weekends. So,
Oh,
but my background was actually my formal trainings in public relations and decided to, okay, pun intended, marry the two. 15 years ago, this April, May time period. I don't have an
okay.
exact start date. I have a start time ish, from that. And so, what we do is help people get featured. So, I work alongside, well, I do work with a few different types of event pros, but photographers in particular on getting published. And a lot of times that means having their weddings and events and styled shoots published, but also getting quoted. But we also offer consults to help them in a bit of a meta move here be interviewed on podcasts and things like that as well. So I always say,
Love
I
that.
when I went to my son, he's no longer in kindergarten, but when he was in kindergarten, I went to career day, having to, I
Mm.
say compete with all the cooler jobs, but I brought swag, so it's fine. I was popular. But
I
when
love it.
I blurted out, I'm like, we basically see the best in these people and make sure everybody else knows about it. And I said it
Mm.
just to simplify it for these bibbies. And I was like, oh, that actually, I should use that all the time.
Right?
Yeah. So I've been doing that 15 years and prior to that in the event and hospitality industry as well.
Love that. Love that. And I love it when you can think about like how to simplify it as a child because I think a lot of times we we think of things all in our own terms and people are like, "Well, what does that mean?"
I like when somebody else introduces me and I hear how they describe me because then I start
Oh,
borrowing words
yeah.
from that. Because that's the thing is to say, oh, I'm a photographer to a degree, people get that. I mean, they don't, they have all
Yeah.
misconceptions, but they at least get it, or like a dentist. But
Yep.
with a wedding publicist, there's like six of us in the world. So you spend a lot of time, you got to find a way to quickly explain so you can get into the rest of
Yep.
it. Hmm.
I get it. Oh my gosh. So, yeah, we're going to kind of chat today about getting published and what that means and what that looks like.
Hmm.
Um, where are you coming from? I don't even know where you are in the world. Where are you coming
Today I'm
from?
coming from home in Richmond, Virginia, although I travel
Oh, I
enough
love
that I'm
it.
here, there, and everywhere. But Richmond, Virginia is home to me after going to school down here.
Love that. Love that. I'm in Michigan, so I get it. You guys have gotten some snow this year, a little bit there,
A
here and
little
there.
bit. We have somehow we're like on the snow rain line, so we got a couple of inches. Completely, the
Yeah.
city completely collapsed. Luckily, it was like over a weekend, so we could just hang tight from that. I'm hoping that's kind of the
Yes.
last of it for a while.
We had that too, and my kids kept getting snow days, and I was just like for listeners listening in, um, we're recording this in January,
Mhm.
and my kids literally got back from holiday break
Oh, yeah.
and went right into snow days a couple days in. And I'm like, are they ever going back to school? Because I had to keep rescheduling all of my
Oh,
podcast
yeah.
episodes. And I'm like, it's got to be quiet. Like,
Yeah, kids get more and more feral the more they're out of school. I mean, I'm
yes.
just
Oh
from
my gosh.
experience.
Yes.
No, snow days are funny because I used to just well, when Oliver was younger, I'd get clearance boxes of Legos and save them and then be like, "This is your babysitter today," and that worked very well. But once the pandemic hit, like, I used to be like, "Ugh, I don't like it."
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't like d day 2 of a snow day. The first snow day of the year is a little magical. All the kids go down our like, we have a
Yeah.
driveway that's very dangerous, so they're like, "Let's do it." But once COVID hit, I was like, "Oh, I would take a snow day any day over a year and a half at home virtual school." Like perspective. Give me a
Right.
snow day, I'll take it.
Oh my gosh, for that is so true, for real. Oh my goodness. Well, let's kind of talk all about the
Yes.
things. So let's kind of talk about how photographers can use PR to play
Mhm.
a role in their success. Kind of tell us
Yeah,
about that.
absolutely. Of course, it depends on what type of photographer they are to a degree, but across the board,
Yeah.
it's always going to be about a few things that benefit. And let me just start by saying this doesn't mean you need to use a publicist, which makes me a bad salesperson, but it's honest. There's a lot of PR strategies you can do in house. So let me be clear when I'm
Hmm.
explaining this. First and foremost, there's always a case for visibility. I mean, the fact is, no matter what market you're in, there's always a lot of photographers. No one's ever been like, we don't have enough
Mm.
photographers in this area. And so to be
Right.
able to stand out by that steady stream of visibility, whether it's featured events, milestone events, weddings, corporate, whatever it is that you
Mm.
do, and in all the things, there is something to be said for that repeat exposure, sometimes paired with the right
Mm.
advertising. I mean, that's a bigger, a whole other conversation when it comes to
Yeah.
that. But in addition to that, there's a few other things. I am not an SEO expert. I'm happy to point people in the right direction. I would not point to myself at that. I work with Sarah Dunn SEO. She does all my stuff. So shout out to her on that. But one of the things I know when Google is looking for people who do what you
Mm.
do, one of the things they value are backlinks, links back to your site. So
Mm.
other
Yeah.
places like The Nod or I don't know, Better Home and Gardens, whatever, links to your site, and you start adding those
Mhm.
up, and that does impact where you are in Google, among again many other things as well. And so
Yeah.
getting featured, it's not just about the visibility, it is the geeky tech side of the more links you can get, the better off you're going to be on Google over time. And then I would also say, no matter where you are in the photography landscape, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it really is about relationships. I mean, it really is about
Mm.
referrals and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
imagine, let's say weddings for a second. Imagine you've got a gorgeous wedding and you want to submit it to a blog and publicate or a publication of some sort. And you had a great time with the vendors, you had a great time with the couple, like ideal situation.
Mhm.
Well, imagine putting your head down doing the work. 6 months later, not only do you have visibility and backlinks, but you have a great positive reason to go back to the couple and say, hey, look at this. You were in the knot, you were in brides, or so and
Oh,
so
yeah.
forth. In addition to doing the heavy lifting and keeping your planners and venues who are in a position to refer business to you. Now, I'm not saying there's a direct link
Yeah.
all the time, but Splendid Insights has this great report that comes out every year, and they talk about the top ways couples find on the wedding side, couples find their team. And some of that is going to be Google
Yeah.
connected to PR. And it's also going to be through referrals from couples as well as vendors. So it all is a bit of a
Mhm.
web, and PR does play a significant role when someone wants to prioritize it. Last but not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't share, and this is for anybody who works with the or intends to work with the Gen Z generation, which that could mean a lot of things. That could be family photos, that could be weddings, so bar and bat mitzvahs,
Sure.
social proof. So it's that
Mm.
psychological kind of phenomenon of if other people are doing it, it's okay that I'm doing it too. And it's
Mhm.
been proven time and time again, this is what Gen Z is looking for during this shift in the consumer. They want
Yeah.
testimonials, they want the as seen in. You can say, and you, I mean the royal you, can say you're great till you're blue in the face, but there's value to other people saying
Oh,
that
for
you're
sure.
great. So that's, when you have well-known people utilizing your photos, and it's also getting published, of course, in the as seen
Mhm.
in, there's a sexiness to it. And if it's you versus somebody else and most other things are the same, that social proof, it's what's going to push them over the edge. So all in all, there are a lot of ways that PR can do some work for you.
For sure. And I think it's important too, like going back to like the SEO part of
Yeah.
things is especially when I blog, and I try and do this when I do other types of sessions as well,
Yeah.
is kind of like if there's any kind of vendors, like who are they wearing? Like what are and when I do like a high school senior session, like what are they wearing? Where did we go? Those
Mhm.
kinds of things. For a wedding, giving all those backlinks of all those vendors you're working with,
Yeah.
that's just going to help you all out in the long run. So I think it's
Mhm.
important to like connect with vendors as a whole, not only professionally, but I mean, we as photographers want everyone to give us credit when they're posting our photos. Why are we
100%.
not giving credit to vendors who also had involvement and a way to say thank you, a way to work together, all the things? It's just so helpful in the long run, especially when ranking on
Yep.
Google and all those things too. But
Mhm.
I think when people think getting featured, I think, and maybe this is just like a millennial in me, but when we think about getting featured, I think we think always about getting published in a magazine. And I know there's like so many other ways to be
You
featured, you know?
know, they do to a degree. And listen, print is struggling in an uphill battle in the media
Mhm.
as a whole, but there's still a stronghold in the wedding space. I would contend though, other sort of lifestyle for those who do more lifestyle photography, you're not going to see a lot of print these
Yeah.
days. And so online is
Yeah.
where it's at most of the time. It's going to be online. Again, podcasts who are those who are fewer about maybe they're not writers, but they want to share their expertise.
Mhm.
Absolutely, that's a way to go. Within the online, it's about having your events featured or having a photo featured, of course, in a roundup with maybe the crediting back, but it's also being quoted. I don't think enough people tackle that side of things, as well when it
Yeah.
comes to that. And so there are different ways for visibility, and we don't want to relegate ourselves to print. There's nothing, well, I say there's nothing wrong with it. Print can be great, and there's definitely gravitas and a sexiness to it, but people can't open up a magazine and go click with their finger, and that's
Right.
harder to track. I just had a really
Mhm.
thoughtful conversation with someone a few days ago who really wants an aggressive like print strategy, and I said I would never recommend more than 10 to 15% print features. Plus, I mean, print is so, to the credit of the great people out there doing print well, still it's
Mhm.
highly competitive because there's so few options.
Oh yeah.
Someone's
Yeah,
like, I want to be in the
exactly.
not print. I'm like, okay, they have literally less than a handful of weddings, an
Mhm.
issue. So that's a lot of competition.
Yeah. Well, and I think as photographers, they want to have like all these featured things on their website just to be like, look at me, look at how amazing I
Sure, and
am.
there's ways to do it,
And
to
yeah,
diversify that and not necessarily try
yeah,
and submit every photo that comes in the door. Like I said,
for sure.
oftentimes journalists are starving for, reliable, well-spoken experts to
Mm,
chime in. We just did one last week with the Knot that was on spring engagements, and yeah, it was great to have the photos. They asked for photos, but it was also expertise. I mean, there were a number of questions to answer. What we find is couples are absolutely consuming this information online. So
yeah,
really leveraging what you know as much as what you put out there for your portfolio can make a difference.
exactly. Yeah, that's so true.
Mhm.
Um, so when someone's wanting to come work with you and your team,
Sure.
what are like the things that they can get in touch with? And then on the flip side of that, what is like the return of investment when they use each of those types of things that you offer?
Sure. Those
And
are
it's
great
kind of a big,
questions.
broad
Yeah,
question,
no,
but
people have to be discerning. I have definitely had people reach out like ready for a publicist. I'm like, you're not though. Like, you're not. That's okay. That's okay. Like, you don't want to work with me. Maybe when I was baby OFD, I would have been like, yeah, come on in. But I've been learned to be discerning because you want people to be happy in the
yeah.
relationship. You need to have someone who has a few years experience minimally. They have to have the portfolio. It's
Mhm.
very hard for someone to start right outside the gates. Now we do have an offering that's more education and consult based, and we have some newer photographers there, and they're awesome. Like, they're awesome. I think of them right now and think how hard they're working, and we have a great relationship
Mm,
there. But to actually be featured, you've got to have the portfolio. You've got to be comfortable and confident with your editing style. I mean, that's a big thing that
yeah.
photographers at the very, what am I? What am I shooting? Like, what do clients like?
Yeah.
What do I like to do? And if someone's work from a year ago doesn't, like, you look at it versus now and you're like,
Mhm.
you want to make sure that your website and your Instagram really in particular, and I would also say TikTok for those, or you reels, things like that. But that
Mhm.
when the call to action is always going to be sending people to those places. So you have to make sure you're
Yeah.
feeling comfortable and confident about what you're putting out there as well. You also have to have the expertise. I can't have a baby photographer 6 months in and have them chiming in on events when they've never done that type of event. Like
Yeah.
I know people are like, oh, well, ask Chat GPT. And I'll be like, one, I know exactly when you use Chat GPT. Like I have a nose for it. Two, I have 3 trackers to know that. And four, I will kick you out if you try and use it. And I've warned people about that as
Oh,
well.
no.
Oh, yeah. No, we don't want robot answers. We want your answer
Yeah.
based on expertise. So you need the portfolio, the confidence, and the consistency. You need to make
Mhm.
sure that you also have that expertise to be able to back it too, because styled shoots, just coming in with a portfolio of styled shoots, that's not enough. Like it really isn't. And I'm
Mhm.
sure we'll dig into that a little bit more later. And so I'm going to tie the rest of my answer into your secondary question about ROI. You have to make sure there's a discernible ROI here. In what I mean is this: when I hired, one of my first hires was an accountant to eventually do my payroll, but to do my taxes and my bookkeeping and all that. Is there a direct ROI in the sense of, oh, because Eric did all this stuff, I made $1 million? Not, which I didn't, but no. But what I did is I took all of that time where it would be me sitting crying in a pile of receipts
Mhm.
as a business owner, and I put it
Yeah.
into business development ventures that have made me money. I've been able to create
Mhm.
courses. I can go network. Like I use that time wisely. So what I would tell people is this: is yes, you can do it in house, but if you want to bring someone in to move the needle faster for you, you want to go further
Mhm.
faster, then you consider bringing someone in. That's the beauty of outsourcing. If you're like, well, I don't
Yeah.
know anything about brides.com, well, come sit next to me because we just got featured last week there. Like we can talk to you about what you have to do to get there, when it comes to that.
Mhm.
When people are looking for an ROI, it's going to be placement. It's going to be, am I hitting my goals? And being honest with their portfolio, though, of course, as well. That's the thing, is you have to come in. We work best with people who can take it, and by it I mean
Mhm.
what we're going to be dishing out to them. You know what I mean? Like people come in, like, I
Yeah.
really think this should be for Vogue. I'm like, oh, is there anybody famous in attendance for that? Like, and if you're offended by that question, well, we're probably not the best. Like we need to be honest with you about
Yeah.
what the editors are looking for. Having my name be the one that's
Mhm.
submitted doesn't change that necessarily if you don't have what they want. And so, but it's
Yeah.
also, the ROI is going to be how much I'm getting published. Am I getting published in the right places that I want, that are a match for everything? If I'm given the opportunity for with us, but for editorial opportunities to chime in, what does that look like? I just sat with a planner yesterday, for example. She submitted 22 quotes last year to us for different articles, and she has over a 90% pickup rate. That's an ROI. Like she's got a
Wow.
vast, press list now. That's an ROI. People would say PR too. What's kind of hard is you have to ask yourself what has to happen for this to be a success. And if someone's like, well, I have to book like 6 weddings from this one feature, I'd say, well, that's not press. Press has other ROI, and it's the visibility, it's the social proof, it's the backlinks. So hopefully people have set themselves up for success and created a structure to track ROI,
Mm.
which would be the contact form has to ask, how did you hear about us? And they have to be tracking that. It's one thing to have the form, but it's the
Yeah.
other thing to actually look at it, right? And then also
Yes.
having like Google Analytics or something likewise on the back end so they can see where the traffic is
Mhm.
coming from as well.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's so important to have like a CRM,
Yeah,
because if you don't know where those are coming from, like you can guess and make that up, but you want actual numbers, and
absolutely.
that's
You need to be
super
able,
important.
yeah, you don't want to be anecdotal about successes. You can't, throwing things against the
Yeah.
wall like, to see what sticks. It's a waste of time, money, and resources for everybody.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of funny when you talk about like newer photographers. It's funny, like when they first start out, and I think this is what drives millennials so nuts that have been doing this for a while, or even Gen X and further on.
Hmm.
But it's these newer photographers that come on acting like they're the expert.
Yeah,
And like
that's always kind of
everyone
funny.
feels like they're the influencer of the photography world. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Well,
oh honey, you need a little longer to understand
and
this.
it's funny though, and I have to give them credit as someone who's an elder
Yeah.
millennial. I have to give them a bit of credit with this is people come to me and they'll say, oh, I just don't get it. This person's only been doing this 2 years, 3 years, da 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 da. I've been doing this 15, and they're being published and quoted and all this. I'm like, and they'll come and tell, this happens all the time when I'm speaking, and I'll say,
Yeah.
well, what are you doing to put your name out there? Like, they're not getting those
Mhm.
opportunities because they're sitting on their butts at home. They are
Yeah.
prioritizing publicity. Like, I think the whole, if we build it, if we build it, they will come, that just doesn't happen.
Mhm.
So, but no, I
Yeah.
agree. It's like I see a lot of people go, I can't believe that. I'm like, well, what are you doing every week to like get your name out there? You know what I mean? Like, are you pitching
Yeah.
to the knot or
I love that. Yes. Oh man. Yeah, it is one of those things we just go back and forth on and we're all just like, okay.
I know. And
Like,
hopefully the discerning people, like, and if I may say, I don't want to deviate too far here, but PR is also B2B, which is where I hang my hat. And I do see that with someone who's like 2 years in and now they're teaching other photographers. And I'm sure that's what you're alluding to a little
Mhm.
bit as well.
Yes.
And I see that and I think, well, I roll my eyes as well, right? Like if a publicist came in 1 year later, like, I'm going to teach you everything. I'm like, well, you know nothing. So I don't know what you're going to be teaching. But I would also contend too, hopefully, the customers on the other side are discerning. And a lot of people aren't. Like, I think
Mm,
the case for, I look at that sort of
yeah.
thing and think, let that be a lesson to me to make sure I'm hiring smartly too. I want someone who is much
Mhm.
smarter than I am. Not, you know what I mean? A lot of people get caught up in someone's like likes and pretty Instagram. I'm like, well, I want you to coach me. And then
Mhm.
you find out it's actually quite lackluster because they lack what you need, you know? Hopefully people are discerning
Yeah.
consumers. We just don't see that enough.
Yep. Well, and I think we live in a world right now where everyone is like, how can I make passive income? Oh, I'll teach and teach what I've learned. And that's been my hard part of what do I have to bring to the table? I want to give out education, which is why I started this
Yeah.
podcast because I'm like, I don't want to be someone that feels like they're an expert in one thing and like try to hone in. I'm like, I just want to teach all the things I've learned. So
It's gotta be
yes,
hard
that's kind
as
of where it is.
I could say, when I talk to people and they wanna educate, if they're a photographer, I just feel like that's such an uphill battle, right? Because you had some
Mm,
real OG people out there, the Jasmine Stars,
mm,
Caitlin James, who lives practically in my
mhm.
backyard here
Yeah.
in Virginia, and they did it well. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
shout outs because like those are actual empires. And then they
Yeah.
did leave room for other people, but I don't think people realize when you look at some of the OG and some of the other people who have been quite successful, I don't think people realize how hard they worked to get there. And
Yeah,
teaching
for
is
sure.
not an easy route because you always have to, like, I mean, I have courses and you always have to be kind of talking about them and
Mhm.
stuff. But yeah, but photographers in particular, there's just a lot of interest in people wanting to branch out to that. And the good news is the quality will always rise to the top, right? But
Yeah.
there's a lot of noise out there too. It's hard. I don't
Yeah,
envy.
exactly.
I actually do a little bit of education among photographers. Like obviously today is a case in education, but you don't see me at a lot of photography conferences because photographers want to hear from photographers. It's a weird,
Mm,
I can
mhm.
even break into my DJs before I can break into the photo. You know what I mean? They'd rather hear from
Yeah.
one photographer who's published in 5 places versus a publicist who's published photographers in 700 different places. You know what I mean? So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Y'all like to hear from each other, which is nice. It's an interesting barrier for us on the outside.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a good perspective. I've
Yeah.
never thought of it that way. Um, let's kinda dig into, like, the whole styled shoot thing.
Yeah.
So,
I have opinions.
tell me how you feel
Okay,
about
let
those.
me tell you, my team and I have varying opinions, and I love that because we end up being quite well rounded. Let me just like shout out to my team. I have three great full time people. I've got some great other like part time and contractor folks who help too. We all have different opinions on this. Here's the thing. I was around in 2009 when styled shoots were like the new thing and they were getting the front
Mm,
pages style me pretty. It was all the things. And there's a lot of benefits to them. I like, I'm going to start in a place you didn't expect me to start. There are benefits to it. There are benefits to,
mhm.
especially if you're in, like, I'm in Richmond, right? Third tier city.
Yeah.
You're not going to see innovation the way you see it in New York, the end. Like, it's just, sorry, Richmond.
Yeah.
It's just not what we're going to see. And you've got that side of it. And you can build a portfolio and really showcase more that's in relation to your brand to inspire couples. I think it's also great to build out that portfolio of just like new, fresh, exciting, diversified things. But in addition to it, I'm a relationships gal. And so if you want to make nice
Mhm.
with some of the venues and do more work with certain planners, go for it. Here's where the problem is. If people are doing style shoots still to get published, that is the wrong priority because these days, editors for the majority want weddings, beginning, middle, and the end. That's what they want. And so to jump out and do these, they have to be mindful of the fact that if you are going to do a styled shoot, let's make sure one, the costs are covered. I'm tired of florists not being
Mm.
paid for their hard costs. Like
Oh, yeah,
it's
for
not
sure.
the same as a Wednesday morning at a venue most of the time. Like, are you booking that every Wednesday morning? Probably not, but a florist is.
Mhm.
So everyone needs to be covered and there needs to be guidelines about the success of that, whether that's going to be things like we want to add to our portfolio. We all want to have a blogging strategy, right? We all want to backlink to each other. We all want to have, and so forth with that. So at the end of the day, you can absolutely do style shoots successfully, but you have to make sure that there are goals other than getting published because getting published should never be top priority. Last thing I'll say about that is photographers as a whole, if you are running the ship, okay, but you want to make sure if you're holding on to those photos, right? And saying you can't
Yeah.
publish until we get featured, that better be your top priority to get that out the door. Otherwise, you run into all of these issues with like, I've been waiting forever, but editors really do need 6, 7, 8 months sometimes. So there's a responsibility to
Oh, yeah,
advertise.
for
So
sure.
yeah, I'm not like super good. I very rarely am gonna say, oh yeah, spend your whole off season doing that. I'm like, no, go to WIPA, NACE, ILEA, MPI, go to things. Don't make things.
Yeah.
Go meet people.
That is one of the things I get really frustrated at a styled shoot is the fact that everything's changing, and I was like, "I wanna show a beginning to end type of wedding,"
Yeah.
and if we're just, like, mixing and matching, models and kinda going you can't tell a story,
Yeah.
so that is a frustration for me when I'm trying to do one of those because
And
I know I did one
yeah.
for a cover shoot, and I was just like, "But I wanna stick with the one couple only so that I can start from the beginning to the end."
Mhm.
But yeah,
And also, and
for
this
sure.
is not my wheelhouse. So I want to say this exclamation point because I'd rather send people to better resources than what's coming out of my mouth in a second. But we also run the risk of tokenism with models and
Mm,
people. I want diversity, so I'm going to get
yeah.
and there are I would shout out people like Brittany Driver at Love Inc., Kirsten Palladino at Equally Wed. They have great resources to help you in you the audience understand how to avoid tokenism and because people like I'm going to put
Mm,
two ladies together that's not how it works and I think there's a lot of
yeah,
well-meaning model strategy out there that misses the mark. So hopefully
yeah,
hopefully people are
of
already
course.
having an inclusivity education in their own brands but they need to turn to people like those two to make sure they're doing it well.
No, that's really good.
Hmm.
Well, and it's crazy because going back to, like, the magazine part of thing
Yeah.
is a lot of people view as getting published in those as a huge success, which I guess in a sense, yes, that's a
Hmm.
huge honor when those um when those are things that you get to be a part of. But what are like additional ways to get featured that
Yeah. Well,
someone might not think about?
absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong, a cover is pretty awesome. Like that's great when it comes to
Yeah.
that. But it's going to be things like again, getting quoted. If you want to get started with getting quoted, join something like a Haro, help a reporter out, which at the time of this recording is going to be moving to something called Connectively. But take a
Mm,
look at it, HARO. You can start getting quoted in kind of business features and just to get your feet wet with that. So that's one way to go.
yeah.
Photographers, and that's a good entry for that. I mean, family photography, and there's so many opportunities there. There are oftentimes slideshows on different sites where it's like where they can submit to those things. Too Bright Lights is still a
Mm,
really great resource, low cost and free resource where people can submit family, lifestyle, social, wedding photos, and they can do it and send it out in a way.
mm,
It doesn't have to be the full gallery sometimes too. That's
mm,
another wonderful way to do it. Podcasts, we're talking about weddings for a second. Two things that statistically, according to Splendid Insights, couples are looking for: portfolio as well as personality. What better way to showcase
yeah,
personality than being? I mean, I think we've learned more about each other in the last
exactly.
29 minutes just having a
Yeah.
lovely conversation over coffee here. And
Mhm.
so then there's the podcast route. There's still room for TV. I don't necessarily pursue that. That's not my medium. But for some, they still want to go in that direction. Want to pitch themselves to a local morning show to talk about family photo shoots around the holiday season. Like, go for it if that's their thing,
Mhm.
And so those are just a few ways to get started on the published side of it. Again, styled shoots for those that it makes sense for. And then last but not least, guest blogging. And that could be B2B or B2C.
Mm.
So B2C in front of those in a position to purchase from you. And then B2B would be your peers. For a long time, we did a lot of articles with Rangefinder and we were doing some
Oh,
B2B
okay.
stuff over there. And that was great. Like I really enjoyed that opportunity. Last but not least, in this is this marketing? Is this PR? A couple more sips of coffee, I may change my mind. But award, right? The award. Again,
Yeah.
Rangefinder, Rising Stars, all the different ones out there. And it doesn't have to be relegated just quote unquote to photography. I mean, there's business related and best workplaces to work at and so forth. Event Tex,
Mhm.
top most influential event pros, wedding pros, Biz Bash does top this, top that, top innovators. Like I would love to see more people pursue that.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people kind of view those, yeah, as those, especially awards. Like I know there's been a couple I've won, and I kind of think people are always thinking, well, like, did they pay for that? So kind of talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to, I don't think if we're talking weddings, I don't think couples think like that for the most part because they just don't know what they don't know. But
I think each other in the field, like, oh yeah, they paid for
yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's more like your peers in that
I think
in that.
people are too anecdotal about that and can be unfair, right? Like there are times where they see someone as a top three finalist and they say, "Oh, they paid for that," and I'm like, "Well, show me where they paid for that. Like where was that?" Like I think some people can be catty and whatever about that sort
Yeah.
of thing, and they're not discerning about that. There are going to be awards where you have to pay, and that is more advertising than it is editorial. That's
Yeah.
editorial to me. What's hard is there people are vacillating and not disclosing that, and they're not going to, right? And again, it's up to the
Yeah.
discerning audience and consumer. But I would tell people make sure that they've got receipts if they're going to say that. You know what I mean? Like I know
Yeah.
this is not quite an award, but we're seeing a lot of photographers in particular right now in the wedding space being like, I was featured in Vogue, and some of them have been, and then some of them have been and have paid a steep price to be advertising
Mm.
in British Vogue. And so you see it because they'll put a photo and they'll put the Vogue overlay over it. And they're allowed to. I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't. And then that you go to the page they were in and it does say, I mean, literally special advertising section. Well, we just addressed this on our collective membership recently on a webinar, but we made sure we had the receipts before we like shouted out, this is pay for play. So I would hope other people, before they start shouting
Mm.
that out, understand. Now, are there times where you submit and you pay to submit? Yes. Is that pay to play? No, I submitted to NACE One Awards. I paid an entry fee and I won it, and I won it on my own accord, not because I paid a registration fee. There were a lot
Mm.
of us who paid, So I just want to differentiate with that as well. But again, it comes down to the discerning audience at the end of the day. And I would advise
Yeah.
photographers be careful because we all know each other's business. If you were shouting out all the time about all these paid you know, average like that's going to lose luster pretty quickly. I tend to avoid the
Yeah.
ones
Oh,
that
yeah.
are paid. Like I don't think I've ever won anything that was based on it, and it was always based on merit and not like money in my pocket. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
No, that's good, and I feel like that is something that photographers just always wanna know, like,
Yeah.
"Am I gonna have to pay for this?" Like,
Yeah.
"How does this work?"
And you may pay a
Just kinda
registration
digging in.
fee, and that is the
Yeah.
cost of I see that a lot with I'm an association girly myself, and I spend a lot of time in associations, and those awards, I mean, that goes towards the staff time. Obviously, these are not for profit, so it's a revenue stream for them, but that's
Mm.
different than, what it comes to. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think you and I probably both agree that when it's not merit based, it loses its luster very
Oh, yeah,
quickly. Yeah.
for sure. So, what should we know when other wedding vendors specifically, or maybe it's just general vendors, wanna enter a submission process? Like,
Yeah.
what should we know besides just photographers?
Yeah. So I often encourage other members. Let's talk. This is mainly for weddings and sometimes some social events as well. Not family shoots. So forgive me, but this is more specific to that question to that. So when it comes to that side of it, I encourage non-photographers to submit as long as they have the photographer's permission. So there's a few things here to bear in mind.
Yeah.
I always say with photographers, listen, if you plan to submit, if someone reaches out to you, well, no, let me take 10 steps back. First and foremost, I'm hoping everyone's protecting themselves with the right language in their contracts. I'm always
Mhm.
recommending Legally Set for that, where they can go in and get the contracts, but making sure there's something that says that the couple can't submit. My goodness, there's so many problems with that. Most editors won't accept anything from a couple anyway, so everyone needs to calm down a little bit with that. But that they're not submitting, and also that other vendors aren't submitting as well without express permission. They can decide what that is and work with
Yeah.
a lawyer to get that. So one, just protect yourself with that. Two, don't be surprised in this day and age where, especially planners, sometimes florists, designers, venues, do the proper outreach and say, hey, we'd love to talk about potentially submitting that. What I tell people is this: listen, if the photographer says they're going to do it, then they own the copyright 99% of the time. Let them do it. I would love to say, to maintain those relationships, there's no reason they have to pull everyone in and make it too many cooks in the kitchen. But
Mm.
if a photographer says, actually, I'm going to do it myself, but I'll keep you posted, they need to prioritize actually doing it. And I'm talking
Mhm.
harsh for a second, but I don't
Yeah.
have enough hands on my body to count the number of times a photographer said, no, I'd prefer to do it. We respectfully back off. And then they never do it. Like, they never do it.
Mhm.
They don't do it. There needs to be clear communication. If they decide that, you know what, I don't have time to do it, but I'd love you as the planner to do it. They need to set boundaries about what the expectations are. They can't be mad if they don't like any of the photos used, or they would have preferred different ones if they don't take the time to set the boundary of, yes, you're welcome to
Yeah.
use the gallery, but I would like to see the gallery before it goes over to the editor. I'd like to see X, Y, and Z and approve that before it goes out. They have to be
Yeah.
able to relinquish control at some point, though, because they're not doing it. They have to make sure that they properly know how they're being, that's the right link and they're being credited properly and all those things. They
Mhm.
have to make sure that that stuff's covered, because once it's out, it's out. And one of the disclaimers I always like to share is, listen, for anyone who doesn't pardon me, focus on getting published, you can't approve, like, once you send out a gallery curated to an editor, there is an agreement there that they can use it any way they want. So we can't, as a photographer, look at a blog and say, well, I don't like those photos. Well, tough cookies. You approved the gallery, so they have to do it any way they
Mhm.
want. Like, that's the agreement. You're not paying for this. And so I
Yeah.
think that's the big thing, is do it in partnership. As a photographer, set your boundaries, know your rights, make sure you set yourself up for success legally ahead of time. And at some point you have to let it go. I mean, if they're doing it, they're
Uh-huh.
doing it. And that's it. Now, can you partner with them and work in tandem? Absolutely. I've seen beautiful relationships like that, where everyone's in agreement on the same page, but sometimes ego starts to take over. So it's kind of a,
Oh,
if
does
you're
it?
saying yes, yeah. And I would say too,
Mhm.
it doesn't hurt if you don't have a publicist around doing this. Make sure you, as a photographer, understand the process. Again, knowing when it's too late to say anything, right? Knowing how many photos.
Yeah.
Well, why can't we send that to brides? Well, because it's not a fit. Like, not. I
Mhm.
would say, it's a great quote: "Applied knowledge is power." So being informed, and being an informed. If you don't have a publicist, then you need to be like super informed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Oh, that's all really good.
tough. It's tough. It is tough. At the end
Yes.
of the day, it's easier sometimes just to say you're gonna do it, but then you just have to commit to doing it, because that starts to,
Mhm.
yeah, it's hard. But you also have to stand up for yourself, because if a planner's like, I want to send this to Vogue, it's like, well, that's a terrible idea. You got to be willing to have,
Mhm.
open and honest conversations.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Of course. Yeah, and I think the more and more we dig into that, there's certain vendors that think like, "Oh, I have the rights to this, I have the rights to that," and they don't think about the legality of it, and they really need to dig into that
Yeah,
a little bit further because they're just and I think photographers are the ones that really dig their heels in the most
yeah.
because they're like, "Well, I got it and I own the copyright to this, so tough cookies," like, you
So
know?
they
But
do, but they're also the first ones not to follow through with a submission. I said
yeah,
what I said.
I
The photographers are the ones most
I'm
likely
in
to drop.
agreement with
Yeah,
you.
they drop the
Yep.
ball.
Yep. And it's so sad for the other vendors because I
Yes.
have other vendor friends that will talk to me because I create quite a relationship prior to a wedding anyway,
Yeah,
just to make that working relationship good. And not everyone has time for that, but that's where I make a priority.
yeah,
And they'll send things like, you know how long it's taking me to get photos back from this person
yeah,
or to even ask for photos. And Yeah, we could go down a whole
We
'nother
need to
episode with
we
that.
need another cup of coffee. We're actually doing and, like, we have this membership where we do, like, different webinars every month and all this, and I told the
Mhm.
team this year, I wanna do a whole hour just on vendor credits. They're like, "Is there enough
Mm.
information?" I said, "Let me tell you about Clubhouse for a second." When I was on Clubhouse for those
Oh my
6
gosh. Is
glorious
that still a thing?
I don't even know, girl, but it was like 6 weeks of glory, right, during the pandemic, and one Friday night, Eliana from the Collective Icon was on there, and it was about vendor credits, and I'm like, "I'm gonna sit in the audience." Well, lady pulled me up. She pulled me up. We talked for 2.5 hours. I was like, "Yeah, I
Oh,
got
wow.
because there's just so much that goes into relationships and
Mm.
vendors and how you're
Yeah.
credited and who gets credited and advertising and all those things. That's the other thing too. May I toss one more out?
Yeah.
If you are the photographer and you move forward with it, great, like move forward with it. But be very mindful of where you are submitting and the rules of how people are credited because Virginia Living
Mm.
Magazine here in Virginia is gorgeous publication. People love it. For a long time they've changed this since. Long time they were taking weddings but they would only credit the venue and the photographer, and I was like, do you really want to submit there and absolutely infuriate
Oh,
your planner? Like, how worth it? Like, I don't think that's ever worth it,
yeah.
literally ever. But then some of the places they're advertising is they won't tag certain people in Insta, and that's usually not a big deal. But like Grace Armand for a long time was like undercover gatekeeping the fact that they wouldn't list anyone if they weren't an advertiser. So no, if you don't have
Wow.
someone like a me to navigate this, then you need to be very
Yeah.
well informed because that actually does the opposite of what you wanted to do.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
make it
Yeah, I
worse.
agree. Yeah. No, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Especially if you're, like, just getting your feet wet.
Yeah.
What would you suggest to, say, a new photographer that's interested in, like, getting into weddings, getting features, that kind
Getting
of stuff?
features.
Where would you suggest them getting their
Yeah,
feet wet?
start small and be realistic, right? Start small and be realistic. First of all, I would love for them, they're going to sit there and hopefully be like, well, I want to be an expert at this. I want to be known for that. Make sure you are
Mhm.
showcasing that on your site before you step out the door and do any. I want to be known as the
Mhm.
leading South Asian wedding photographer in Dallas. Okay. Just making this up. And so are you showcasing that? What does your selection of galleries look like? What does your blog look like? Like, is it clear before you put yourself out
Mhm.
there that you really are the expert and you're sharing that education, whatever that is, through video and so forth. So that's first and foremost. So from there, you look at your advertising relationship. So if you are advertising anywhere, revisit and say, hey, are there any editorial opportunities I'm missing over here? There's some really great
Mm.
blogs, publications local where they might have a Facebook group where they write advertisements, say, hey, we're looking for family photos for the holidays and submit. So just make sure you've like low hanging fruit. From
Mm.
there, sign up for Two Bright Lights. Again, I think there's a free version where there you can literally submit individual photos because sometimes when you're newer, you may not have a whole gallery that you're like, this is it, this is the one, but
Yeah.
you can send in photos and then sign up for, one of the free, like I said, Haro, soon to be Connectively, where, Monday through Friday, 3 times a day, with the exception of holidays, you get emails from them and they are looking for all sorts of different experts. It's not always in the wedding event photography space, but it could be business, things like, and it just gets your feet wet. Those are some great starter
Yeah.
places.
Yeah. Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head earlier in this episode about being consistent in your work because I think newer photographers aren't sure what they want their editing style to be.
Yeah.
And when you are constantly changing that and not being consistent across the board,
Mhm.
like that's going to reflect negatively on you,
It really
especially
does. I
when you're
100%
submitting.
agree with you on that. And so, all eyes are watching. So you just want to be mindful
Mhm.
of that. I know this is very cliche, but you can only make that great first impression once.
Mm.
Mhm.
No, that's good. Well, before we end, I want to give you an opportunity to add in any last thoughts that you have that you think that should be covered as far as the getting featured, getting published.
Absolutely. I will tell you, I've been doing this 15 years, submitting on behalf of all sorts of amazing photographers. And as much as things have changed and we're going through this generational shift and all the things and whatever and all this, the visibility factor, the getting published factor still is a strong strategy. It's not something that you have to hire someone to do. You can do it yourself.
Mm.
But I wish it was more what people prioritize, and also always put people first. I guess that's my last bit is,
Mm,
if
yeah.
you've got like a quick hot take here is like, if the couple doesn't want you to publish, if the family doesn't want you to, even
Mm,
if they said yes in a contract. I mean, we sign stuff all the time. We don't know what we're saying. Let's be honest,
yeah.
right? Who's reading that 8-page contract sometimes? Not everybody. Lawyers read it.
That's true.
And if they, full stop, don't want the photos, you move on. Like that is the end
Mm,
because it's always going to be more about like, here's the thing, especially for weddings. I'm like, the couple paid you for your work.
yeah.
You've been compensated. Like this is just, icing on the
Mhm.
cake, right? So just making sure that you put people first, whether it's that,
Mm,
if you don't feel super strongly about media where you want it, but the planner is desperate to put it in these places and it makes sense, let the planner do it. You know what I mean? Like let them do it. Let the
mhm.
people,
Yeah.
yeah. So that would be is always put people first. We do. I mean, there's times we were working with um we are working right now with a planner who had a shoot and they had a ton of different photographers there. And we're talking about a strategy, but we're always putting the people first, right? We're not going to put someone in a
Mhm.
position where an editor publishes them and then gets mad because they saw the similar shoot elsewhere, right? So you always put
Mm,
people first.
yeah. Oh, this is all so good. We could
Yay.
keep
I
going,
know. I
but
was like,
we're
I
gonna
got
end
another
there.
hour. Let's do this. No.
I'll have to have you back again
I
another
love
time. We
that.
can keep going, but before we end, where can we find you on the web?
OFDconsulting.com. We actually just went through a new spiffy rebrand that took years off my life. And so you can go over there and find me. Also Instagram, OFD Consulting as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And if you're wanting to find the podcast, you can find us at karahainesphotography.com/podcast, or you can find us at Cameras and Coffee Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Megan, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank
I am
you.
so happy for everyone to hear all these little nuggets of great information. I also want to mention real quick, Megan has offered a free guide for listeners to know the right weddings to submit if you're a wedding photographer. There will be a link to that in the show notes, so don't miss that. And listeners, until next time, I just want to say cheers.